Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, December 7th, 2015. Start of a brand new week. And, of course, it's Pearl Harbor Day. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Quick program note. Tomorrow, our third-hour guest is Mark Haywood, talking about pallet gardening, vertical surfaces gardening, guerrilla gardening, whatever name you want to put on there. Tomorrow, of course, is also the anniversary of the assassination of John Lennon. But getting on back today, our phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So today is the 74th anniversary of the not really a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. We posted some of our articles on that subject, and it is worth going back and constantly re-examining and studying every single time the United States government has tricked the American people into a war with a lie, a fraud, or a deception, or a combination thereof. Now, at this point, with all the documents that got declassified back in 1994, it's pretty much understood that Roosevelt not only knew the Japanese were coming well ahead of time and did not tell the Navy commanders so he could scream, "Surprise!" But it's also come out Roosevelt deliberately goaded the Japanese into the attack following an 8-step plan put together by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. It was an 8-step plan of actions which to the American point of view would seem trivial, but to Japanese sensibilities were all horrible insults. And all during 1941, Roosevelt implemented all 8 of the steps in the plan, and Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. That's how Roosevelt got Americans to get enthusiastic about war against the Axis power. The real target was, of course, Nazi Germany. And Japan was the back door. And you need to remember this, because they're still at it today, lies, frauds, and deceptions to trick you into going along with a particular agenda. We're going to be talking about the San Bernardino attack. They're still out there laying that one on with a trowel. We'll be talking about that. Some of the things we put up at WhatReallyHappened.com, the video of the bones of Station H. It's something we put together some years back, because over on the windward side of Oahu, there's now a state park, Aiea State Park. And if you look closely, the remains of the listening station that was there operating in 1941, you can still find it. The foundations of the radio room, the foundations of the antenna towers, and that radio station intercepted the radio command to the Japanese fleet to sail into Hawaiian waters, be ready for the attack. This idea that it was all done with radio silence is absolute nonsense. When the larger Japanese ships would receive radio orders from Japan, they would have to rebroadcast them to the smaller ships. There was one fueling ship that was racing to catch up with the flotilla. They were broadcasting their location without even bothering encoding it. It was heard listening posts all over the Pacific. It was picked up at Station H. There was a Matson steamship, the SS Lurline, on its way from San Francisco to Honolulu. Their radio man, Leslie Grogan, was picking up the broadcast from the Japanese fleet and plotted a map of the fleet's position and progress across the Pacific Ocean, heading for Hawaii. When the Lurline docked at Honolulu Harbor on December 4th, he turned his log and maps over to the Office of Naval Intelligence, and it promptly disappeared. So we have all of those links, and you need to go back constantly and remember all these lies and frauds, the Lusitania carrying weapons, no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, no Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, to understand and put in the proper context what you are hearing today. Now, I went out and I did a quick little search on Bing for U.S. advanced knowledge of Pearl Harbor, and I got over 2 million hits. The truth is finally getting out. Now, last night, Obama got on his primetime platform and broadcast a speech out to a lot of people. The response to it has been tepid, to say the least, because all Obama did was go on out there and try and resell this idea that even though neither Syria nor Iraq have given the United States permission to conduct military operations in their respective nations, the U.S. claiming to be fighting ISIS and mostly hitting Syrian and Iraqi people and infrastructure should continue their military operations, while Russia, which has been invited into both Syria and Iraq by their governments and is actually targeting the U.S.-backed terrorists, should leave. He's out there saying, no, this is what you will think. This is what we told you before. You should go on believing it. And, of course, the response to that has been pretty weak because we're not believing it. And, of course, all the war hawks were saying, he didn't go far enough. He should have declared war on the world right now and get it over with. We know that's where we're going to save the economy. Now, Obama has urged Congress to authorize war against ISIS, which basically amounts to a declaration of war against the rest of the world. Because anytime any nation on planet Earth doesn't do what the U.S. tells it to do, they'll send in their little ISIS actors who'll dance around, make some nice videos, and go, I'm ISIS, I'm a bad guy, and the U.S. will say, oh, we have to go make war on that country. Now, CNN, in support of Obama's agenda, came out with a story insisting the majority of the American people support sending ground troops to fight ISIS in Syria and Iraq. That's what they're telling you. We ran the same poll on our website. Came out 2% yes, 98% no. I'm beginning to think those corporate media polls are lying to us to try and convince us to go along with the agenda on the illusion that all of our friends and neighbors are ready to fling their children onto the bayonets of the Syrian and Iraqi forces. Why shouldn't you? Relying on the herd instinct in the American people. Now, a little bit of good news. Obama went off on this tear about how Congress should pass a law banning anybody on the no-fly list from being able to buy guns. This immediately resulted in a surge of gun stocks on the stock market. In fact, they're one of the few that did well today. The problem with Obama saying we should ban gun sales to anybody on the no-fly list is that, first of all, the accused shooters in San Bernardino were not on the no-fly list. The no-fly list is arbitrary. There are no checks and balances. Even the supporters of the no-fly list admit the vast majority of people on that list shouldn't be there. This is Obama trying to open the door to get you to say, well, yeah, I guess certain people should be banned from owning guns. Then they'll enlarge the list. It's just like what they did with the torture scandal. Back when Abu Ghraib first became visible, they said, well, you know, these are terrorists. It's okay to torture them. And then people said, well, I guess maybe. And then they started enlarging the definition of a terrorist to the point where it now includes anybody who runs or reads a conspiracy theory website, flies the Gadsden flag, Christians. If Obama gets this law, they'll just put the entire American population on the no-fly list. That'll crush the airline stocks and tourism, of course. But no sacrifice is too great to get the guns. Story coming out of Prison Planet, no less. Liberals openly admit, we must destroy the Second Amendment. Because the rich and powerful will never sleep soundly in their beds as long as the poor and oppressed have the means to fight back, is really what it comes down to. The Pentagon is saying they are preparing for huge civil unrest in the United States of America. Now, maybe it's real because we know we're heading into an economic crash, or it's going to be staged. Hitler did exactly that with Germany. He used his brown shirts to kick up riots and unrest and used that to end the German Republic and establish the Nazi dictatorship. History may not always repeat, but it certainly rhymes. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you in just a minute, but over the commercial break, I was looking here at Fox News. Rudy Giuliani is on there trying to make his political points on the tragedy in San Bernardino. And, of course, from the corporate media's point of view, it's a foregone conclusion beyond any possibility of doubt that Mr. and Mrs. Farouk And, and she's only 90 pounds. And cleverly they disguise themselves as 3 tall, athletic white people to shoot up that San Bernardino center. And anybody who doubts that, really, you're just going to help the terrorists win. But Giuliani's out there saying, well, it shows our vetting process doesn't work. Well, certainly for the illegal immigrants and the refugees, there is no vetting. But the Farouks came into this country following the prescribed immigration procedure, and they passed the background checks twice. The reality is they can't actually find anything to link these two to the San Bernardino Center shooting. It's all innuendo. They could have done this. They could have done that. More about that a little later in the show. But first of all, we're going to take a call from Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew.
Hey, Michael.
Hello. What's on your mind? You're on the air.
Are you there, Michael?
Yes, you're on the air. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, we seem to be having a technical issue here. I don't know why. Let me put this on hold and see if I can come back to him. Andrew, are you there?
Hey, Michael, are you there?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. All right, I'm going to put you back on hold, and hopefully Tom will get on the line and figure out what's going on over there. Now then, getting on back to Obama's pushing the gun grab, and they're out there. They want the guns. They're terrified of the American people right now because the American people, for the most part, understand how badly Wall Street and Washington, D.C. have screwed this nation up in the quest for more of those ink and paper tickets and jewelry and bling and gold things, and they pile it all up in the middle of their living room and take their clothes off and roll around on it and have orgasms. And because the rich can only get rich by taking away more from the poor are getting a little bit upset about that. But let's get back to the reality. I mean, the New York Times was out there saying, we've got to end the gun epidemic. Guns are a disease. You've got to get rid of them. They're only designed for killing people. That's a very common theme coming from the liberal gun grabbers. Guns are just supposed to kill people. That's the only thing they do. No, actually they don't. Guns chase four-legged pests out of farm fields. I did that as a kid. Guns will put food on the table. I've done that. Guns will chase two-legged pests out of your home at a time when the average wait time for a 911 call is running anywhere between 15 and 23 minutes. And the fact that these gun grabbers can't imagine any other uses for guns other than killing betrays their absolute complete lack of experience and knowledge on the subject. But of course, ignorance never got in the way of a liberal standing up and claiming they've got the answers to all of life's problems. But we do have a right to keep and bear arms, and common sense says we have a right to have weapons at least equal in capacity to those weapons the U.S. government was handing to Mexican drug criminals in Fast and Furious. But the liberals want a world where the people have no weapons at all and only the government has guns. And there was actually a movie about that place. It's called Schindler's List. All right, let's try again and see if we can get Andrew in New York. Can you hear me?
Hey, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Michael, are you there?
Can you? Okay, I'm going to drop him, and hopefully he's going to call back in. I don't know what's going on with our phone system today. All righty. Now then, interesting observation. I'm not the only person going on out and saying that this is obviously another false flag, and they're going to go on killing Americans and waving the bloody shirts to try and trick us out of our Second Amendment rights. Article over at Investment Watch blog. Until Obama gets the guns, false flag attacks are now part of American daily life. And they're pointing out the fact that ever since Obama and his gun grab agenda came into the White House, mass shootings have gone through the roof. And the promise has always been, give up your guns, we'll protect you. Give up your guns, we'll protect you from crime. History shows that didn't work. Crime went up where guns were banned. Then they tried, give up your guns, we'll protect you from the mass shooters. Except the mass shooters are getting their guns from whatever source they need. One of the guns used in San Bernardino came from a police department. And now it's give up your guns, we'll protect you from ISIS. And they can't do that either. They want your guns because they are afraid they are losing control over you. They're losing access to your wallet. They are losing access to your children for their wars of conquest. Every dictatorship in history tries to disarm their people so they will do what they are told to do. All right, let's try and see if we can get Andrew again. Andrew, can you hear me now?
Yes, Michael.
Okay, I don't know what was wrong with the phone system. I could hear you, but obviously you couldn't hear me. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about Syria. I think it was yesterday that the U.S. was claiming over on trying to hit airstrikes against ISIS, but they hit like a Syrian army camp, and Syria looks like the U.S. is behind this. And what happened is the U.S. denied it, and said it was Russia who hit the camps. Like, they're completely lying with everything.
Of course they're lying. That's all they got left. You know, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. That's the motto of the U.S. government and the corporate media right now.
And in Syria, it looks like since Russia and the Syrian army is advancing against the rebels and ISIS, like Turkey has like building, is like, I think it's going in Iraq, and Israel sometimes does airstrikes against the Syrian army. It looks like they're trying to like provoke Russia to do something. They're not going to hit like the Russian airplanes, but they're going to hit Assad's army.
Well, here's the issue. If it had been Israeli airplanes, they wouldn't have gotten in that deep. Israel can go way out over the Mediterranean and come in and pop off some stuff at Damascus and not get shot down. But the area where the army camp was targeted was well under Russian air cover. And so whoever went in there, Russia thought they were supposed to be there until the last second when they swiveled over and bombed the wrong target. But this is not a unique incident. As soon as Cameron got Parliament's permission to go into Syria, they bombed this oil field and declared victory, except it turned out the oil field had been destroyed 2 months ago. They're still trying to create this illusion they're going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're not, because ISIS and Al-Qaeda work for the West. The real war continues to be against Syria's Assad, part of the larger agenda of dragging the whole world back to dependence on the U.S. dollar. Because if the world drops the dollar, if they drop the petrodollar deal, the U.S. economy is absolutely finished. There is nothing left to support our economy once that usurious relationship with the rest of the world is ended. And that's why they're so desperate to get these wars going. Andrew, going to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as Andrew in New York was mentioning, over the weekend, the U.S. bombed a Syrian army camp at the Deir al-Zur province. Now, Syria has called it an act of aggression, which is exactly what it is. The United States does not have the permission of the legitimate government of Syria to go on in and drop bombs. The U.S. position is, we were attacking an ISIS camp. Russia was bombing the Syrian troops. Lies on more lies on more lies. But the reality is they're still playing the same game they've been playing for over a year, going on into Syria, telling you that this is the war on terror, miss the terrorists, and bomb Syrian and Iraqi people and infrastructure. And Saturday's attack, or rather yesterday's attack, proves they're still doing it. And Obama's speech last night proves the U.S. government still thinks you are all stupid enough to fall for the lie again and again and again and again and again. Meanwhile, U.S.-led airstrikes killed 20 civilians in Hasaka. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here from Nathan in California. Aloha, Nathan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I'll make it real quick. I know you've got a lot on your agenda. I wanted to talk about Pearl Harbor, but one thing on Syria, I heard Putin, 10 days ago, a week ago, he was expressing great concern about these, possible accidental bombings, that this is something you shouldn't do. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to be very, very happy about all of this because he predicted it or was showing concerns about it.
Well, no, what he was doing is he was calling out the U.S. Ahead of time, because for the last year, every time the United States bombs a hospital, a pipeline, food storage, any of that, water supply, power stations, oh, it was an accident. We're sorry, it was an accident. We meant to hit the terrorists nearby. And then it turns out there never were any terrorists nearby. Remember when they bombed the hospital in Afghanistan? And they said,
yes.
Oh, the terrorists were firing from the buildings next door. And then you look through Google Earth at the hospital, it's in the middle of an open farm field. There are no buildings nearby.
Yes, Yes, I know that this is real serious stuff. You know, the best thing for France and Germany, England, the United States, and anybody else that wants to join the coalition, just cut the Russians a check for $150 million. You know, let them do it. Stay out of it. They're doing just fine. You know, these.
Oh, that would be the common sense approach. The Russians are doing a really good job. The U.S. the U.S. could be doing a really good job, except the U.S. is playing this double game. They're telling us that they're going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're not. They're going after Assad. Russia is going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and that's why they're making the United States look wimpy by comparison.
Well, I'm ashamed to be an American when I see things like this.
I'm hearing that more and more every single day from everybody I talk to.
Yes. One quick thing on Pearl Harbor. Great job on, you know, exposing the fraud, but a lot of people don't know, and this is how I came to be convinced that Pearl Harbor was a fraud. There is a thing called the Pearl Harbor of the Atlantic. Now, the British had cracked the Enigma code in June of 1941. War was declared, you know, by Germany, and on January 13th, we got hit with 5 German U-boats that came across the Atlantic, and they attacked us. Now, Halifax, you know, we were being warned, but Halifax, you know, harassed a couple of them, and they came south, and you can't tell me that, you know, Roosevelt didn't know, you know, that this was going to happen. The British were warning us. There are 5 German U-boats coming to the United States, and we did nothing. And, in fact, there were almost 400 ships sunk in 6 months, 5,000 people killed, and you can't tell me that Roosevelt didn't do anything about this. You know, this was a double tap. And this is to make sure that everybody in the United States is all on the same page, that we got to go over to Europe and tear things up. So that's my 2 cents on Pearl Harbor. The second event, the Pearl Harbor of the Atlantic, really proves that the people who were cracking the nut on the first event are probably right. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You know, what's really interesting, there is a communique in the National Archives from Winston Churchill to Franklin Roosevelt on December 6, 1941. It is the only World War II communication between the two leaders that remains classified.
Yeah, I believe it. You know, people don't know about Station X, but this was the largest code-breaking operation the world had ever seen. 10,000 people were working on this problem. And after the war, Winston Churchill had everything burned. Everything. So, you know, if there were any communications, you know, involved with Station X and Winston Churchill and Roosevelt, it's all gone.
Well, they did destroy it, and they destroyed all the documentation, but of course they kept Station X and Alan Turing's machine because at the end of World War II, Great Britain and the United States made presents of captured German Enigma machines to the governments of their friendly allies, not telling them that any messages that were sent on those were going to be decoded by the U.S. and UK.
Yeah. Well, those are pretty fancy machines. What I understand is that a supercomputer today would take an entire year to decipher, you know, an Enigma code message.
I've seen exercises where they take the original Enigma and they make a simulator out of it, and supercomputers today could make quick work of it. You know, Alan Turing's machine was built with telephone relays.
Okay, well, what I heard was, you know, obviously false then, but I guess they were spinning it a little bit. But I still refuse to believe that Roosevelt didn't know that 5 German submarines were coming.
Oh, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did.
They tried to blame it on Admiral King because he had a bad experience with the British in World War I, and he thought they were kind of like pompous idiots. And at the same time, the British were trying to tell us, please, convoy these cargo ships and oil tankers and all this other stuff. Convoy, convoy, convoy. And finally, after 6 months, they said, geez, maybe we ought to do that after almost 400 ships and 5,000 people died.
Yeah, but the companies that were building the Liberty ships were making money hand over fist.
Duh. Oh, that's a good point. Anyway, thank you, Michael. One last thing, and I'll get off. I'm writing a song called Jingle Bullets.
Yes.
It's about all these, and I'm having a professional singer do the lyrics. When I get it all done, I'll send it to you, and maybe Claire can help tweak it and fix it, and you can keep it and have some fun with it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we're going to let you go here, and we're going to start with Adam in California. We've only got about a minute and a half before the commercial break. What's on your mind?
That's fine, Mike. I just wanted to remind everybody, it's just be ashamed to be an American. I'm proud to be an American. I'm just ashamed of the people that parade as Americans and do all these deeds on the American behalf. Just remember that America is community, so when things happen, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. That's how you...
I like that. I like that. I'm proud to be an American. I'm ashamed of the government.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Mike, real quick.
All right, you raise a good point. You raise a good point. There's much about America to be proud of, but there's definitely a lot to be ashamed of and humiliated by coming from Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, and that is absolutely what's going on. All right, we got a whole bunch of calls waiting online. I'm not going to start a new one because we're coming up on a commercial break, and I don't want to get going. Now, apparently over in Syria, the U.S.-backed opposition is calling for the extermination of the Alawites in Syria. Now, the Alawites are Bashar al-Assad's strongest supporters. Remember when John Kerry and Obama was trying to tell you that Assad was using sarin gas on his Alawite supporters? Those people. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking all over the corporate media where all these different observers are saying there doesn't seem to be a clear White House strategy to deal with. Well, that's because the White House is pulling a giant flim-flam. They are trying to convince everybody that all of this war and bombing is against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, wherever they may be found. And that's the dodge, because the real goal is getting Assad out of Damascus and reimposing U.S. puppet rule all over Iraq. That's the real goal. The phone lines are absolutely loaded up. Let's start taking phone calls. Rick in Kansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, it's been a long time since I talked to you. First thing I want to say is the government did not increase Social Security for the second year under Obama in history. This is the only second time in total history that there was not a cost of living increase. So that's a cut. They're also cutting Social Security $168 billion, and that's about $84 billion over the next 2 years, and they're increasing more spending, $150 billion. That's about $75 billion over the next 2 years. And also, I'm just going to get this stuff out, and then you can talk about what you want. They're canceling the War Victims Fund, Crime Victims Fund by $1.5 billion, and also disability was going to be cut by 20%, and so they're using some of that extra money that out of the 75 of 84 billion to plug the hole in disability income. And I think it's a travesty that we're making our seniors. We're taking money away from our seniors so we can bomb and kill more people.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right here. And that money in Social Security is not the property of the U.S. government. It is the property of the American workers. And the U.S. government has borrowed that money and is technically in default against the American workers.
Okay, I'm going to let you go. I got all my numbers out, and you can talk about it more if you want to. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to grab Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Just I thought I'd chime in on the Pearl Harbor stuff and say that there obviously you've talked about a couple, but let me reinforce these. Not only was the McCollum memo being implemented in the Pacific, the freezing of assets, the moving of the fleet from San Diego to Hawaii, the banning of sales to Japan, oil and steel, but also remember the Flying Tigers. They were flying 100 U.S. P-40s in what was one of our first covert actions, being paid as civilians over there actively fighting the Japanese. Then part of the McCollum memo was the cruiser patrols that have yet to be, the really aggressive, threatening cruiser patrols that have yet to be really even declassified. But I want to also say at the same time that was going on, we had basically occupied Iceland for the British. We were having the naval war in the Atlantic where our destroyers and naval vessels were escorting as far as Iceland, relieving the British, of half their duties. Then I don't know if you knew this, but one of the planes that spotted the Bismarck was an American PBY that was also hushed up. So all this stuff is going on, trying to get us into war, and of course, the question of do we have their operational naval code, not just the diplomatic, but the operational naval code. And Stinnett, the guy you've had on before, pretty well says that we did.
Oh yeah, that's been confirmed. Stinnett wrote most of his book on the basis of documents declassified in 1994, which showed that, yes, indeed, the United States cryptographers had broken all of the Japanese codes, not just the diplomatic code, but the military codes as well. And that's why, again, Station H picked up the signal, Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor decoded it, and it went to Roosevelt directly, but was not shared with General Short or Admiral Kimmel, so that the attack would look like a surprise. There was actually a Navy exercise. Task Force 29 was out there in the Pacific, northwest of Hawaii, right in the path of the oncoming fleet. Roosevelt called up Admiral Kimmel and said, "You get those ships back in port right now," without any explanation.
Michael, how about the covered up, the assertion that the Japanese were under radio silence, and then that cargo ship that actually picked up their signals northwest of Hawaii?
Well, everybody was picking up their signals. The idea that Japan proceeded under radio silence is part of the original myth, but it was being picked up by U.S. government radio listening posts, not just here in Oahu, up in the Aleutians, British stations down in Alaska. This was before satellite communication, where long-distance communication had to be by shortwave, bouncing it off the ionosphere, which meant everybody was going to be able to pick it up everywhere. The ship you're talking about was not a cargo ship, but a passenger ship, the SS Lurline, and the radio operator, Leslie Grogan, plotted the advance of the Japanese fleet across the Pacific, handed it to the ONI on December 4th, and it basically disappeared.
Oh, man. Oh, man. Honestly, if people really knew all the stuff that went on.
Well, the whole point of the independent media is people need to know what's been going on, so that they're not tricked by the same machinations again. And I'll give you one more about Pearl Harbor. A guy by the name of Dusko Popov. He was a British double agent, codenamed Tricycle. In August of 1941, he handed the complete plan for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor to the FBI. And the FBI said, "This is nonsense," and they tossed it, which means either the FBI were being idiots, not beyond the realm of possibility, or they were already clued into the fact that Roosevelt was engineering this surprise attack, and they needed to keep the lid on that.
Oh, my God. Well, you know what, Michael, it's, this just, all of our myths are myths.
That's exactly right, and we need to understand that. I got a letter from somebody saying that, at his child's school, because it's Pearl Harbor Day, they're still teaching, it was a complete surprise attack by Japan. That's all it was. That's their job. That's what public school is paid to do, is to instill the official mythology that you will believe as you grow up, to make you more useful to the money junkies and the power freaks.
Wow. Keep up the good work, Michael. Got well. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. We got a caller waiting on the line. I don't have a name or a location, but what's on your mind? Hello? Okay, we got a dead line. Let's go. Now then, apparently realizing that the border with Turkey is about to be shut down, the U.S. is now apparently trying to use Jordan as a new corridor for weapons and supplies from the U.S. to ISIS and al-Qaeda. This according to a report over in INFOWARS News. The Kremlin is now responding with a certain degree of anger over the presence of CIA TOW missiles in the hands of the terrorists. And apparently Russia is now deploying dozens of their T-90 tanks to the south of Aleppo. And the T-90 is it's a top-of-the-line tank. It's one of their best. And they're deploying 90 of them. That is going to be an absolutely formidable line of armor for anybody to try and get past here. Syrian army has destroyed al-Nusra strongholds in key areas near the Turkish border. They're going to shut that border down. No more ISIS oil going up, no more weapons, terrorists coming down. Russia's conducted another bombing mission into Syria with the Sukhoi 24. This one was escorted by 9 Russian fighters. 3 Turkish F-16s showed up, decided discretion was the better part of valor, and did not engage. Now, okay, we've got Carrie in Florida. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I was calling regarding Russia being the good guy here. They're the only ones fighting ISIS and so on and so forth. But I've learned so much from you regarding all wars are banker wars, and we must keep in mind that Putin and the BRICS are part of the United Nations deal to get rid of the dollar, to collapse America. And I'm just wondering, I got this information from a wonderful article from Brandon Smith. I don't know if you're a reader. He's one of my first reads.
Okay. Well, you know, this sounds like the counter-propaganda to make it all Putin's fault here. We got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour commercials and news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And over the news break, I'm checking in with the corporate media, and they're out there basically doing the excerpts from Obama's speech last night saying, you know, our current strategy in Syria and Iraq will work if we continue it. Well, it hasn't worked at all for the stated objective of getting rid of ISIS and al-Qaeda, has it? So the only way in which Obama isn't flat out lying to us is it's working in the context of bombing the Syrian people and economy, and same with Iraq, into total submission. Okay, now then, remember just posted a story, getting on back to Pearl Harbor. Apparently to the Dutch, they knew the attack on Pearl Harbor was coming because they had broken the code and knew the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. And apparently there was this book written back in 1980 in which high-ranking Dutch officers said they were very surprised that Americans still thought it was a surprise attack. By the way, if you go over to my Pearl Harbor article and you look at the top, there are photographs of the local Hawaii newspapers announcing the attack is coming on December 1st. 1941. Now, getting on back to Syria, Russia has started a propaganda campaign in the terrorist areas of Syria, dropping flyers that basically say Israel is controlling ISIS, which they are in part. We know they're all buddy-buddy with ISIS. They've been treating wounded ISIS fighters in Israeli hospitals. There has been no end of photos and videos of weapons and supplies being handed by the IDF to ISIS across that border. President Assad is out there saying Britain and France were the spearheads in supporting the terrorists in Syria. We know that's certainly true. Now, as you know, there's been a big scandal over the revelation that ISIS is stealing Syria's oil, and they're selling it through Turkey. Turkey's the middleman, the broker, the son of President Erdogan, is neck deep in this scandal. When the scandal first broke, the official U.S. response was, we absolutely reject it. It cannot be true. It's not possible. It's a lie. Well, with the volume of evidence coming out that this is in fact going on, and the financial tentacles are already reaching into Great Britain and the United States itself, the official U.S. response has now changed. And they're saying, well, you know, the actual volume of Syrian oil sold to Turkey by ISIS, it's insignificant. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. So the official story has gone from it couldn't possibly exist to it's no big deal. So Erdogan is buying and reselling stolen Syrian oil. You guys are just so picky about what's going on here. The U.S. Air Force is complaining that they're running out of bombs to drop on ISIS. They have been pounding Syria and Iraq into absolute rubble. Always seem to miss ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're complaining they don't have bombs. They're running out of bombs here. So you, the American people, cancel your Christmas shopping and send all that money to the Pentagon because they have to buy more bombs. And by the way, this is the same scam they were pulling in Vietnam when they were constantly bombing suspected truck parks that always turned out to be empty fields. It was just an excuse to blow up the munitions and then force the American people to buy new munitions. Money, 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 money. That's what it's all about. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I think the Russians are going to have to do air support for the Syrian Arab Army after this.
Very well. But again, you know, I know Putin is being very, very cautious. He does not want a direct confrontation with either Turkish aircraft or U.S., UK, French aircraft over Syria, even though none of those forces have permission to be there. But Putin knows that's really what the West wants. Putin understands the only way the United States government is going to evade responsibility for the coming economic crash is they need a world war so they can blame it on somebody else.
And Mike, the media keeps pushing, you know, Raqqa as the capital of ISIS. Well, how come maybe Putin should drop a fuel air bomb on there, and then they would have to change their capital to Libya then? Wouldn't mean a percentage of the fighters might leave Syria.
That's the problem when you're dealing with a mobile terrorist threat. You know, they don't have a geographical bound. That's why Obama's call for Congress to authorize endless war on ISIS is such a joke. You know, now they're saying there's ISIS in San Bernardino. What's Obama going to do? Drone strike San Bernardino now?
And Mike, I want to talk about, I noticed on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News that they're using a lot of footage of the Russians bombing ISIS and saying the coalition are bombing it. You know, MSNBC was so lazy they even black-barred over the longitude, latitude, and the range on the HUD. They were too lazy to overlay.
Yeah, you can still see the Cyrillic, you know, around the border of the digital display. Yeah, they've been doing that all along. And they've been caught doing it, but they go on doing it because right now the corporate media is playing to the people who are still dependent on the corporate media. The corporate media understands they've lost everybody in the independent media and online. We all know it's a lie and a hoax. They're not even bothering to try and bamboozle us anymore. They're just trying to cling desperately to the true believers who are enslaved to the matrix of corporate media.
Yeah, because I was watching, I'm like, wait a minute, that refinery scene. That's a scene. Wait a minute, the Russians bombed this like a month ago.
Yes, that's exact. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem the U.S. and its coalition are facing. They have to convince their people they're bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but they haven't been. They're bombing Assad. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing power stations and water supplies. This is war against Syria, and they're trying to convince you it's a war against terror. No, it isn't. It never was. It's part of that plan that Wesley Clark blew the whistle on all the way back in 2003 of conquering all the Middle East oil-rich nations and shackling them permanently to the petrodollar.
But the thing is, the Russians, their red line is in Syria, so I think that's where the next world war is going to be. I hate to scare people.
Well, we need to be scared. We need to be scared because we know in past history, every time the U.S. government gets into an economic mess of its own making, they get into a world war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. And since then, the United States has invaded and bombed 7 countries and drone-struck dozens more. We've got U.S. military operations in something like 170 nations around the world. That's 3/4 of the planet, where the U.S. government is militarily intervening in one form or another.
U.S. government's loved by thousands and hated by millions.
Yes. Loved by the money junkies and hated by everybody else. Okay?
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go here. Now, there is another crisis zone building up having to do with the border between Turkey and Iraq. in particular the Kurdish area, Turkey has basically started sending troops into Iraq. Technically, that's an act of war. Iraq is responding by saying they may approach Russia for direct military intervention. Iraq, like Syria, does not want the United States in there. They're inviting Russia in. Now, Turkey was claiming these were just trainers and advisors. Unfortunately, reconnaissance photos are showing they're building an air base in northern Iraq. This has prompted a huge reaction where Iraq is now threatening to go to the United Nations Security Council over this very obvious, unprovoked aggression into their territory. Baghdad has reassured everybody that they're not going to send any more Turkish troops into Iraq, but they're going to keep the ones they've got there. Then Turkey went one step further. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu is out there saying that Turkey has a duty to protect its troops in Iraq. If they come under attack, Turkey will respond across the border. And it gets worse than that. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the building confrontation between Turkey and Iraq, where Turkey has sent troops into Iraq without Iraq's permission. They're saying they're trainers and advisors, but we have surveillance footage. They're building an air base without the permission of the government of Iraq. Turkey is the aggressor. The government of Iraq has issued a deadline for Turkey to withdraw. It was a 48-hour deadline. We're about halfway through it now. The clock is counting down. Turkey has officially said they will refuse to withdraw from northern Iraq, even though they are clearly in the wrong under international law. The Prime Minister of Iraq has ordered the Iraq Air Force on alert and basically said to be prepared to defend Iraq's sovereign territory. So it looks like we're going to see some kind of an air battle over that part of the Turkish-Iraq border, and that will open the door to the war that all these war hawks want. And I cannot tell you how incredibly stupid this is. Remember what I said about Sun Tzu and the Art of War. In the very first book, Sun Tzu lists all the things a ruler must have to achieve military victory. One of them is you must have a military that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they will fight and, if necessary, die to achieve their objective. The second, you must have a civilian population that believes in the moral rightness of the war so that they will silently bear the losses and burdens war brings to the home country, even in victory. The U.S. government has neither of those. We're going to grab some phone calls here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I want to continue with the vein you've just been introducing to the audience. This is the most dangerous situation ever. What I'm seeing now is that one of the deputies in Iraq has said that if this deadline goes, not only will they attack the Turkish, but any American bases in Iraq. Now, Turkey's move into northern Iraq looks like a typical ploy encouraged by the U.S. government. To me, this is just another piece of nonsense coming out of Washington, D.C. They tried it with the Russian airplane. That didn't work. Now they're trying it in Iraq, maybe a softer target. But I think it's so dangerous. These people are crazy. And we now know that Iran and the Shia militias from the south are organizing 50,000 men to go northwards to tackle the Turks.
Yeah.
And Iran is also saying, you know, the Ansarallah group in southern Iraq,
yes,
they're supposed to be going with 50,000. And Iran is also right on the border, ready to go. This is so dangerous, it's unbelievable. And I think your assessment that we will be in a war before Christmas, a major war, think you may be closer than you think.
Well, I would love to be wrong. I would absolutely, dearly love to be wrong. If I were a religious person, I'd be praying that I'm wrong. But
well, I'm sort of tending to that proposition as well, that we'll be in a major war before Christmas. Oh, and by the way, the Syrian Arab army that was bombed by the coalition, we know who it was. It was tornadoes from RAF Akrotiri.
Okay, there's a confirm. There's a confirm. It wasn't the Russians. The Russians hit what they aim at, you know. The Russians kill what they're aiming at. If Vladimir Putin went on a duck hunting expedition and accidentally shot his friend in the face with a shotgun, the friend wouldn't get up. Dick. Okay, John, I got to let you go. I got to take another phone call here before the commercial break. Thank you very much, and we're going to switch over here to Dennis in Florida. Aloha, Dennis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Michael. The geopolitical aspect of everything, which you inform us on very well, I appreciate. I'd like to talk about the weapons of mass distraction. I mean, there's so many distractions. Of course, it's important what goes on overseas and with the wars that have been going on for as long as I've been alive, and I'm not young. What's important to me is to understand the way they distract us in so many fronts. I mean, so many fronts.
Well, they're trying to jam us, okay? The strategy of the propagandists has shifted. Originally, they were trying to basically tell us what they wanted us to believe in order to get us to do what they wanted. But as their credibility has crumbled and people are turning away from government and the corporate media to the independent media, now the strategy is just try and jam it. Put out as much nonsense and garbage as you can to keep everybody confused so they don't know where to look anymore. That strategy isn't working either, but that's what they were trained to do because they're working from propaganda manuals that were written 50 years ago.
Well, you would say that it's working to some degree. I mean, I know you're very optimistic when it comes to the amount of people that are enlightened and awakened, and it is growing. Its numbers growing, but in my circles, I don't see it very often. So it's kind of discouraging.
Well, there's something you need to understand. One of the biggest lies we're being told is that anybody who isn't believing the government and the corporate media is some kind of a nutcase who should be shunned by society. So you've got a lot of people who are walking around who are thinking the same way that you are, but they don't want to say anything because they will look bad to their fellow Americans. And when you have the courage to speak out in the room, hey, something has gone wrong, you will find a lot of heads starting to nod, and they're going to say, gee, I thought I was the only person who was thinking that. And that's why it's so important to have that courage to speak out, to give others the courage to speak out.
But I find it's a rare strength. I mean, I really do. I mean, I know a lot of smart people, and I've talked to people who told me straight to my face, if you are right, I don't want to know. Willful ignorance at its extreme. And I think that it's a disease in this country. I really think it is, and I appreciate your optimism.
You know,
and I'm optimistic as well.
I'll tell you where that's coming from, okay? They don't want to know about it because they don't have the courage to do anything about it. And that was the same thing that trapped the German people, who knew what the Nazis were doing was wrong, but thought if they were just good little Germans, it would all work out in the end. And it didn't. And that is something you need to remind these people who say, all right, even if it's true, I don't want to know about it. You can just tell them the German people made that same mistake with the Nazis. How did that turn out? Dennis, got to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, Turkey is also trying to kick over a huge kerfuffle over at the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. And the issue has to do with traffic going in and out of the Black Sea. Now, Turkey was trying to block Russian ships last week and was reminded that under the terms of the Montreux Convention, which allows Turkey to control the Bosphorus, they're not allowed to block the military ships of any nations that border the Black Sea. So they backed off. Then over the weekend, Turkey got a photo of a Russian ship transiting into the Black Sea, and they saw a sailor holding a rocket launcher. And they made a big deal about this. It was a provocation. He was brandishing this weapon. And they're trying to come up with some excuse by which they can block Russian ships going in and out of the Black Sea. And they don't have a legal basis to do it unless Turkey formally declares war against Russia. So, that would make, of course, that part of Turkey an immediate target in order to control that passage in and out of the Black Sea. But all of it goes back to this Montrose Agreement between all of the seafaring nations that do business in the Mediterranean. There can be no interference with civilian shipping, no interference with military ships for nations that border the Black Sea, and strict limits on the number and duration of stay of military ships from nations that do not border the Black Sea. But at this point, it looks like Turkey, like the United States, could care less about international law and treaty obligations. They want their war, and they want it now, and by golly, we're going to get it. We worked for it, we deserve it, and nobody will deny us. Now, up in the Caspian Sea, the Russian fleet is beginning military exercises. Everybody is training up for this war that the U.S. is desperate to plunge us all into. Now, according to WikiLeaks, Turkey apparently planned the shoot-down of the Russian Sukhoi 24 6 weeks before it actually happened. They basically sat down and said, we need to provoke Russia by shooting down one of their planes. We're going to shoot it down over Turkish airspace. That makes Russia the bad guy. Unfortunately, the Sukhoi was only maybe in Syrian airspace for 17 seconds. And the Turkish warplanes pursued into Syrian airspace and shot it down there. So that fizzled. But apparently this was not an accident. It was being deliberately planned for. Now, Russia is very upset over the fact that Montenegro may be joining NATO to try and encircle Russia. Russia may not have much to worry about because apparently the people of Montenegro are not at all happy with their government wanting to sign them on to one side of a coming world war. And apparently, as soon as the NATO flag was put up on a flagpole, a crowd gathered and tore it back down again and burned it. Everybody's getting sick and tired of all these war organizations, these giant empires, these unions that exist solely to strip mine the wealth of working people and give it to the money junkies. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Joe in Alaska, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, first-time caller. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you, too.
I wondered, a week or so ago, and I don't think you picked it up in Canada News, Alberta instituted a carbon tax.
I had actually heard that, but a lot of places are instituting carbon taxes now because it's an excuse to tax the people. All of these governments are broke. And if they can't tax you for one thing, they'll tax you for something else. And they're going to tax you for carbon, and then it'll be a nitrogen tax and a cloud tax and a rain tax and a whatever tax, because that's basically it. They're going to go on taking more and more money away from the people until the people stand up, slap them on the nose, and say, hey, that's enough.
The Prince Charles was the one that, the impetus for this was that he said that global warming caused ISIS, but at any rate. The other thing I wondered if you picked up, Indian Point had an accident here yesterday or something like that, big green glow.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that one. I knew there was an earlier one. I didn't pick up on yesterday. I'll have to take a look for that.
They dropped a couple, 3 or 4 control rods down into the bottom.
You mean they absolutely lost the control rods down to the bottom of the reactor? That's not good.
Also, yeah, they had to shut it down.
Yeah, I can imagine. You start losing control rods, that's a major problem. If you lose 2, then you've got to check and make sure the rest of them aren't going to drop off, because if they all drop off, you've got a real problem.
Yeah, I picked that up on ENE News.
All right, I'll take a look for that one. That is a serious, serious problem.
Okay, Mike. Thanks a lot. Nice talking to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for the phone call. Now then, ISIS is now in Yemen, an excuse for Obama to go and start bombing there because the Saudis are not making progress in this proxy war to convince the people of Yemen that life under a U.S. puppet ruler is better than no life at all. And apparently ISIS has assassinated or is claiming to have assassinated Aden's governor. And of course, it's only a coincidence that ISIS in Yemen helps the U.S. agenda. It's just a coincidence, really. You know, if you start thinking about conspiracy theories like that, the terrorists are going to win. Now then, one of the reasons they've hit a problem in Yemen, and this goes back to what I said about Sun Tzu. Your army must believe in the moral rightness of the war so that they are willing to fight and die when told to. And I'm looking at this article that came in from Fars News. Apparently, what is demoralizing the Saudi soldiers in Yemen, as much as the illegitimacy of their attack, is the House of Saud's vast financial corruption, which is becoming public day by day by day. And I expect the same thing is going to be happening to the U.S. rank and file and military forces, and it doesn't matter how much the government tries to isolate them, keep them from reading websites like WhatReallyHappened.com. They're talking to their families and friends. You can't block that off. And as more and more of our government's corruption reaches those frontline troops, they're going to realize that they're really not as enthusiastic about this war as maybe they were when they first signed up. And let's see. All right, that link doesn't work. I'm trying to deal with all this stuff. Now then, your daily dose of Booga Booga. Daesh may use weapons of mass destruction in European Union. This is coming from the European Parliament. You thought Paris was bad. They're coming with germs. They're coming with chemicals. They're going to do horrible things to you if you don't all give us your money and your children to go conquer the Middle East. It's really what it comes down to. All righty, let's see. Getting on down here. Kiev is moving tanks, rockets, and self-propelled artillery to the front line in Lugansk. They're getting ready to really crank up things there. Another possible point of confrontation with Russia. That's what they really want. War with Russia against the ruble, war with China against the yuan. Now, U.S. spy planes have started flying from Singapore over the South China Sea. Now, the only reason they're doing this is to provoke the Chinese, because the U.S. surveillance satellites see those manufactured islands very, very clearly. They're just sending the airplanes over to ping off the radars and drive everybody nuts, rattling the sabers. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and getting on to news of Israel. Apparently, it is now coming out that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel is the target of an infiltration and spying campaign. No big surprise there. And apparently some of the spies were detected and confessed, saying that they were working on behalf of Woolworths. Woolworths is denying it, but at this point, who's going to believe anything any corporation has to say anyway? Just the reality. Now then, big stink happening up in Turkey. Apparently there was this Israeli organ trafficker who's well known, and he's wanted for crimes back in Israel, and he's been up in Turkey. And apparently the deal there is he's going to these Syrian refugees who have absolutely run out of any money to go further toward Europe, and offering to buy one of their kidneys or some other component of their body for enough money to get them to Europe. Talk about vulture capitalism. Well, he got caught and he got arrested, and Turkey's going to go back and extradite him back to Israel. What, if anything, will happen to him there, we don't know. But it does show how these refugees, first they're bombed out of their homes. They're trying to go to a new home, and somebody's there buying bits of their body to get them there. Everyone's saying, oh, we should feel sorry for the Syrian refugees. Actually, I do. But the way to solve the problem is not to let them pour into Europe and the United States, but to stop the wars that make them refugees in the first place. Isn't it amazing? And the corporate media saying, oh, we must be sympathetic, we must be generous, we must be welcoming. Nobody talks about stopping the process that made them refugees in the first place. They seem oblivious to that obvious conclusion. Now, apparently the Swedish foreign minister, Margot Wallström, has declared Israel's targeting of Palestinians as unlawful killings and said that Israel is escalating the violence in the situation. And, of course, Netanyahu was out there throwing a tantrum. You anti-Semite, you Jew hater, we're going to have the Americans nuke you. Because Israel wants to do the crime but doesn't want to do the time, so to speak. Now, in Jerusalem, as you know, it is under United Nations mandate a shared city for the three great religions of the Western world: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. I think it would be nice if they all did share. Unfortunately, there is an Israeli group, Lahava, that is protesting Christmas decorations in Jerusalem. And there's a lot of that going on here in the United States of America. You know, they want menorahs and dreidels, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're going to have a menorah and a dreidel, I'm going to have a Christmas tree. And the person over here is going to have whatever they're going to have. That's what religious freedom means. Anyway. And it's not just Israel. Apparently, up in Birmingham, Great Britain, there is a flower stall in this, it's called Central Flowers. It's been in the city center for 40 years. For the last 10 years, during the Christmas season, they'll put up decorations, and they will play Christmas music as part of a charitable fundraising drive. This year, they got notified by the city council that it is illegal to play Christian music during Christmas season in the heart of the city center, and that if the owner of the flower stall is 52 years old, if he persists in doing so, he will be put in jail. Now, I kind of wonder just who it was who complained about Christmas music being played. I don't think it was the Christians. And I don't think it was the Muslims either. That narrows it down. Now, over in France, they've had the first stage of their elections, and it was a bit of an upset. Marine Le Pen and the National Front emerged as the strongest party in the elections. They could even have a supermajority. Hollande is clearly on his way out. Marine Le Pen has a good shot at being elected in 2017. Now, the socialists in France are in a panic. In fact, socialists all over the world are in a panic because their governments are getting voted down as people come to understand that socialism is a failed concept, like we didn't know that already from the former Soviet Union. The Marxist vision was from each according to their abilities, to each according to their need. Unfortunately, the Soviet Union corrupted that idea. So has every other so-called socialist movement. It's from each according to their abilities to the government that needs. Haitians just had their election. They're screaming massive, massive election fraud down there. We need reliable elections, fair elections, open elections, honest elections. We will not have democracy until our election system is above reproach. That means visible, trackable, and accountable from beginning to end. No computers. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. James in Ohio, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I was thinking all this Turkish business. When I was a young man, I read a book called Terrorism by a man named Walter Lacour, and it had a treatment of the situation in Turkey during the early 70s. And at that time, I guess, it was a common everyday occurrence for a group of men to burst into cafes with machine guns and ask if you were left or right, or sometimes they wouldn't ask at all, and slaughter slaughter everybody based on their answer, or maybe if they just felt like it. And, you know, call me a racist, but the feeling I got from that and from many other books I've read is that the Turkish national character makes them somewhat, that makes their logic somewhat inscrutable, and they're somewhat excitable, like a teenage Italian boy in love, except they're not in love, you know. So I would expect to see a lot more loony antics and nonsensical decisions out of Turkey.
Well, I absolutely agree. That's certainly been their national history all the way back to the Ottoman Empire. And, I mean, during both World War I and World War II, the brutality hit an absolute peak. And we're heading into World War III, and it looks like Turkey got tapped to fire the opening shot, just like in World War I. Austria-Hungary and Serbia were the sparking point, but the real war was the U.S. and Great Britain against Germany's economic might. And that's what's going on here. They're going to spark a war in Ukraine, or they're going to spark a war between Turkey and Syria, or they're going to spark a war between Turkey and Iraq, but the real war is the U.S. dollar against the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan.
Yeah, Turkey's a good choice for a fire starter. I agree with you. And that's all I have for you.
All right. Well, thank you very...
Keep up the good work.
I will as long as I can here. And if they can't get war with Russia, they're going to do war with China. At this point, they don't care. The economy cannot be held together any longer. All of the major indicators are we're going back into a recession, if not an outright crash. And if Washington, D.C. doesn't have an enemy to blame it on, we, the American people, are going to put the blame where it rightly deserves to go. Wall Street corruption and Washington, D.C. complicity. They looted and plundered our nation for their own personal enrichment. It has got to stop, especially when they're trying to cover up their crime by burning down the scene of the crime in a nuclear mushroom cloud. Now, down in Venezuela, landslide for the opposition, allegations of vote fraud, but President Maduro has accepted the results. So now another socialist government has gone down, although in Maduro's case, in Hugo Chávez's case, the socialism was working. They were really taking care of their people. That's why the fascists couldn't stand them, because their idea of a world and economy is that everybody works to make them rich and endures their servitude and hardship because the imaginary playmate in the sky will love them, or they've got a sense of duty, that they're ennobled by their suffering and starvation. All right, we're going to take our top-of-the-hour break for commercials and top-of-the-hour news. When we come back, we're going to go back and take another look at San Bernardino. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. We're going to talk about what happened in San Bernardino last week, and the egg timer has run out long ago on this one. And a lot of attention is being focused on the eyewitness reports that the people who came in and shot up the Inland Regional Center near San Bernardino were 3 white males, big, muscular, wearing utilities, body armor, all of that stuff. Kevlar, Nomex, Velcro, all of that. And these witnesses were reported on TV. And now we're seeing the TV try and transform 3 white males into a Muslim husband and wife. The wife weighed 90 pounds, was very small. And by the way, there has been no release whatsoever of any security camera footage from within the Inland Regional Center itself. And we know everybody's got cameras now. Everybody's got security. Where are the videos? Now, one of these witnesses was a young lady, was interviewed on CBS News. And then when they end her interview, the commentator turns to the camera and with a straight face says, of course, we know there were only 2 shooters and one of them was a woman. They're just absolutely trying to make this go away. And the second eyewitness, Juan Hernandez, saying 3 white male shooters. It isn't lining up. There is 0 evidence that actually links the Farouks to the actual shooting. It's all innuendo. It's all things posted to Facebook. It's somebody calling up and saying, I'm ISIS, and we blessed them, and they were working for us. It's all circumstantial. There is absolutely no hard evidence they had anything to do with it. And they're trying to basically smear them. The big story today was how these two went out and practiced at a rifle range. So does everybody who owns a firearm. Where are you going to go to practice if not a rifle range? Everything about this young couple is they came to the United States to live here, to live the American dream. They passed the necessary background checks. He had a good job, liked to restore classic cars. They were integrating into the American culture. Hadn't been to a mosque in 2 years. Had a brand new baby. And the official government story is this young couple who were not devout Muslims all of a sudden became radicalized and turned around and committed this horrible attack. It just doesn't make any sense. They don't fit the profile. And the corporate media is out there with a full court push to say, oh yes, they do. That's why we have to spy on all of you. We don't know when any one of you could all of a sudden become radicalized, like it's a disease. Like a radical sneezes on you, and the next day you wake up and you say, I'm going to go shoot up a building somewhere. Now the good news is, around the world, and even the United Nations, looking at the web traffic, they're paying very close attention to all the reports of the 3 tall, athletic white men in military attire who attacked that center in San Bernardino. Now, you remember how CNN let a break-in to the apartment of the named suspects, and they went in and they were looking at all. The place was torn up because the police had already been through there once. It turns out that no, in point of fact, that scene had not been cleared for access to the public. It was still an evidence scene. CNN basically did a break and enter, brought in the family members of the victims, and let them rummage through the place, destroying any evidentiary value. Now, you remember when the first report came out about the raid into their home and they said there were pipe bombs? These people had pipe bombs. Well, the FBI had to backtrack on that today. There were no pipe bombs. There were some pieces of pipe, which could be bombs if they had the other necessary ingredients. You know, people buy pipes for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with violence. When I was living with my family in West Covina, California, and my mother got sick and tired of having to drag the hose for the washing machine and put it in the sink drain, I tore the drain apart, I got some pipe, and I ran a T-connector so the hose had its own little inlet permanently, make life easier for her. I didn't take that pipe and blow anything up with it. Why do you think hardware stores sell pipe? Because people use it. The gun grabbers are probably going to say the only reason for pipes is to make pipe bombs. We have to ban it. It's all smear by inference. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Daniel in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, I just sent you a link about from the Daily Mail about this lawyer representing the Farouks. He says this thing smells like another staged Sandy Hook style thing.
He's absolutely right.
The Boston bombing family of Tsarnaev.
Yes.
They had doubts. They said the FBI were tailing them and coddling them. So we're just seeing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like that article in Investment Watch blog said, the government's going to keep on doing this. They're going to stage more and more mass shootings until they trick us out of our guns.
Yeah, on a related note, I because I've gotten into the whole subject of conspiracies and so forth, I've been watching this PBS documentary called The Roosevelts, and interestingly enough, forget the Pearl Harbor thing, but the Theodore Roosevelt was he was appointed Secretary of the Navy or Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Yes.
And then less than a year later, you have the mine in Cuba, the Spanish mine, and the false flag there.
Yes.
And it's like this connected family. warmonger Teddy Roosevelt. Everyone, in America thinks he's the darling president, and he did a lot of good things, built the Panama Canal and everything. But I think he staged the false flag, or he had part to do with it.
Well,
anyways,
he may have. He may have, or he may have just gone along with the orders, because with regard to the USS Maine, I mean, Captain Sigsbee said they had a fire in a coal bunker, which on coal-fueled ships was a common occurrence. It's one of the reasons they made the switch to bunker fuel oil, before the days of nuclear ships. Coal bins would explode. Coal dust is very explosive. It's one of the components of black gunpowder, as a matter of fact. So, but, Teddy Roosevelt was definitely a loyal American, and he would have followed whatever orders he was given. He didn't have a reputation for standing up, but he was a very colorful person, and he did a lot of good things. The national park system is a good one. But on the other hand, he was a soldier, and he obeyed orders, did the charge up San Juan Hill, and actually, my grandfather, the one who used to get drunk with Richard Nixon, was one of Roosevelt's original Rough Riders, and that's why when Teddy Roosevelt organized the Yankee Division for World War I, why my grandfather signed up with them. And Teddy Roosevelt wanted to lead the Yankee Division in Europe, but Woodrow Wilson didn't want to risk having an ex-president killed or worse, made a prisoner of war, and so Teddy Roosevelt had to sit that one out, and he was very angry about that.
Interesting times, and just learning your own history, it really helps to see what the pattern is. Anyways, the three men, the white men seen at this San Bernardino thing, this story, it's going to be interesting to see how they try and spin this, if they do, or try and bury it. So,
well, they're ignoring the witness statements now. It's back. The corporate media's attitude is there is absolutely no reason to doubt that the Farouks did this, and anybody who doubts the official story is a nutcase who's going to help the terrorists win. And they're just trying to bolster that with all of these things about how these guys went out and practiced with their guns at a gun range, which everybody who owns a gun does. And in San Bernardino, most people own guns. It's a shooting community. We'll be right back.
Exactly.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about the economy, and I realize it's hour 3. We're way behind on the list of things we wanted to talk about, which is, okay, we'll take them into tomorrow here. The Bank of International Settlements has issued a warning that if the Federal Reserve hikes its rates, which Janet Yellen is dropping hints may happen, trying to bolster the credibility of the U.S. dollar, it could unleash the biggest dollar margin call in history because of everybody who's been buying derivatives on dollar-backed assets, some of which will go from being in the green to being in the red if rates are hiked. They are really, really stuck. Now, over in Europe, Finland has been held up as the model of the European Union economy. They've got reasonable austerity, good employment, blah, 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 blah. They were the poster child for why the European Union was working, except that it wasn't. And it's reached the point right now where Finland is literally going to start sending out checks of money to their citizens to try and get their economy working again. Because all of these private central bank-based economies are missing a key component. When you have this giant economic pyramid system to suck the wealth out of the population and drive it toward the money junkies at the top, there must be a mechanism to take that money out of the top and recycle it back down to the bottom to the workers so they can pump it back into the economy and keep the process going. Over the last 7 years, that recycling system has been done away with. In true fascist fashion, the private central bank system in the United States, the private central bank system in Europe are sucking money out of the pockets of the people, putting it in their own, and there's no money left. There's no new income, no new wealth coming in to pour into the bottom. And that's why everything is locking up. And these money junkies are so blinded by their own addiction, they can't see it. Just like any other kind of an addict, opium addict, meth addict, cannot see the damage their addiction is causing around them. The same exact mechanism is happening here. Venezuela has descended into a barter economy because of their economic woes. And that's only going to accelerate it because if people are engaging in barter, the government can't collect tax revenues on it. All of a sudden, barter isn't looking that bad after all. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Chip in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just was stumbling across an article this weekend, and the headline was, this is actually from last year of July, all right, 2014. Goldman Sachs buys into the Turkish Petchems Aegean port. They bought a 30% stake in it. So, selling this oil coming out of Syria and Iraq.
Yeah, that would be a wise move for them to do.
And I have not heard anybody reporting about that. Just kind of slipped under the radar.
Well, because from the U.S. government doesn't want the American people to understand that our assets in Syria, ISIS, are stealing Syria's oil, selling it through Turkey, and it's going on out to other countries like Israel's buying a big chunk of it. They're literally plundering Syria under the guise of fighting terror. By the time this is all over, it won't be worth kicking Assad out anymore because Syria is going to be drained dry.
But the timing for Goldman Sachs to be doing that, everything kind of lines up with what Putin actually says is going on. So just I thought you would be interested in that and look that up, Goldman Sachs, Turkish port.
Yeah, I definitely will. I mean, it's consistent with the pattern that Erdogan's son earlier this year was buying up all these oil tankers, $35 million a pop. It's got to be putting something in there. I don't think he's converting it to his new floating luxury pad, the way Bill Gates did. He bought a research ship, and he's had it completely redone as his floating palace. All right.
The port that he's sending all that oil out, Goldman Sachs bought 30% of it. So.
Well, that means Goldman Sachs is getting 30% of the port usage and transit fees. Chip, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're coming on a commercial break. Before we get there, though, a little more economic news. The United States is refusing to guarantee Kiev's debts, and that is a problem because if Kiev doesn't pay up on all the money they owe Russia for natural gas, Russia will sue in international court. I wonder how Russia is planning on foreclosing on Kiev, which would be the next step. But again, every time the world gets in this trap of artificially created usurious debt, everybody settles their accounts with a world war. That's where we are right now. German media is complaining that the Russian sanctions have killed the tourist business in Antalya. A lot of German business, a lot of European businesses have suffered because of this little sanctions economic war, saber-rattling going on between the U.S. and Russia. Meanwhile, repeat of a story that came out yesterday, and it's worth repeating. 10 of the biggest Wall Street banks and 2 trading platforms are facing a U.S. class action lawsuit, accusing them of rigging the $320 trillion derivatives market, specifically interest rate swaps. And there's billions of dollars they made off of this, and now they're facing a class action lawsuit. J.P. Morgan and Citigroup are now on the side of people saying the U.S. economy is steamrolling towards a recession. The Bloomberg Commodity Index has crashed to a 16-year low. It's 22%, the 2009 trough, when we were still dealing with the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud. Peter Schiff is out there warning the whole economy has imploded, collapse is coming. It's locked up because so much of the nation's wealth has been concentrated in that top 0.1%. There isn't enough left out here in circulation to run the economy. Everybody is waiting for somebody else to pay an invoice. It's locking up, and the money junkies did it while Washington, D.C. looked the other way. Apple is facing what they call a possible inventory correction. Multiple surveys are showing that iPhone sales are dropping, and it's because we don't have money for new iPhones. I'd like the new iPhone 6S. It looks like a pretty hip little device, but I'm perfectly happy with my own iPhone 5. I don't need to upgrade. I'm not going to buy a new iPhone until this one dies. Plus, you have more and more people are getting leery of smartphones as a class of appliance because of all the spying built in there. GPS fed to the government and the police, listening to you in your room. A lot of people concerned about their privacy are ready to go back to a pair of Dixie cups and a waxed string. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk about the race for the White House. Actually, at this point, it looks like a stagger. And I'm starting to feel about the political campaigns the way I feel about the Christmas decorations in the shopping mall. It starts way too soon, and by the time you get to the actual event, you're just so totally burned out on it, you just don't want to bother anymore. So Hillary Clinton is out on the campaign trail, and she's out there courting the Jewish vote and promising. In a speech yesterday at the Sabin Forum in Washington, hosted at the Brookings Institution, Hillary Clinton is promising, I will take the U.S. relationship with Israel to the next level. And she will work to strengthen and intensify our relationship on military matters. In other words, Hillary is basically promising that if she's the president, she's going to hand the keys to the American military forces to Israel. They're already plugged into our missile defense system. They're already plugged into NSA spy networks. Hillary is saying whatever Israel wants to attack, we will attack. Your kids get to go. It'll be fun. It'll be an adventure. They'll get to see a part of the world they've never seen before. Dirt, desert, and blood. Now, apparently, during this same speech, Hillary actually came out and said the United States must reserve the nuclear option for Iran. Now, of course, if any Republican said anything about nuking Iran, it would be headline news. But the media basically glossed it over, even though it went out on Twitter and was seen by a lot of people. The corporate media is, no, it's a rumor. She wouldn't say anything like that. Michael Wilner was live tweeting the event, made note of Hillary's comment. Now, apparently Hillary posted an op-ed piece in the New York Times published earlier today. And she's trying to counteract the fact that a lot of people are seeing her as very much in Wall Street's pocket. Wall Street has been a very generous donor to her campaign and her foundation. And everybody's saying, well, if you're taking all this money from Wall Street, you're not going to be working for the American people. And she's out there promising she's going to rein in Wall Street if she's the president here. She's going to have tough new rules. And she declares, get ready for this, no one should be too big to jail. Okay, Madam Hillary, how about we start with you? For all the crimes you've committed throughout your entire career with your husband, Bill. At the very least, 15 violations of Title 18. Campaign finance law violations. Let's have this no one is too big to jail. Let's have it go all the way to the very top. It's gotten so bad with Hillary's campaign, even former Vice President Al Gore is declining to endorse her. Doesn't want to have anything to do with her. Now over in Germany, Angela Merkel just put out a video, it's linked to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, thanking all these foreign workers for the huge effort they've displayed coming to Germany. She is just so happy with all these refugees streaming in. She just wants to gather them together and hug and hug and hug. Merkel's plan is for more than 1 million asylum seekers by the end of this year, which is the end of this month. And Merkel is acknowledging the extreme difficulty these refugees are encountering trying to cross Europe during this cold winter, which we're not supposed to notice, by the way. Now, we are getting a promise from the U.S. Department of Justice that they're going to investigate the practices of the Chicago police, mostly triggered by this video of the shooting of Laquan McDonald, a very obvious attempt by the police to sabotage surveillance videos in the area. The fact that the final release of the video proved that they lied about what happened. I'm still waiting for the Department of Justice to investigate those secret torture sites the Chicago police were running. That seems to have fallen off the shall investigate list. Now, over in Wisconsin, very interesting situation. There was a hostage situation at a Wisconsin motorcycle shop. It was a standoff. And one of the people killed by the police in this standoff was one of the hostages and not the gunman, who coincidentally was part of a lawsuit suing the police for $50 million over a previous botched raid. And in an amazing coincidence, the Wisconsin police who gunned him down were the defendants in that lawsuit. How very lucky for the city and taxpayers of Wisconsin, the lawsuit just went away. Apparently over in Detroit, there was a teenager, Dominique Rondo, and he was throwing snowballs, which is something kids do in winter. One of his snowballs hit the windshield of a police car. He was thrown in jail for 40 days. Then the police finally came back and said, yeah, maybe we overreacted. He's suing them now, and he should. Police state USA, you're not allowed to throw snowballs. Our police are becoming as thin-skinned and easy to upset as our college students. Remember the protesters back in the 60s? End the war, freedom now! Today, college protesters, don't hurt my feelings. Please don't hurt my feelings. I will cry. The police are getting to be the same way. You hit their car with a snowball, they throw you in prison. When I was a kid, if you hit a police car with a snowball, the policeman would start throwing snowballs back at you. Anyway, interesting little revelation from Hollywood Reporter, no less. TV advertising falls globally. Digital, poised to overtake by the end of 2017 for the entire world, will overtake TV advertising here in the United States next year. Leading the decline in TV ad revenues are all those TV news shows. They are losing their audience because nobody likes a liar. Poor Brian Williams, how will they come up with his $8 million a year salary if nobody's watching MSNBC? It's a problem. A little bit of good news. Former President Jimmy Carter has declared he is now cancer-free. 91 years old, still going strong. A lot to admire about the man. And I'm so glad he's cancer-free. He's done a lot of good. I know a lot of people would say he's done a lot of bad. Jimmy Carter's only real problem as president, and unfortunately it's one that also affects Donald Trump, he was very dangerously politically naive about the reality of Washington politics when he became president. Trump is more of the same. Trump has bought into way too much of the Kool-Aid, but I still would like to see him as president, if for no other reason than it's going to break the hereditary monopoly on the White House that we've seen between the Clintons and the Bushes. It's time for some fresh blood. Even if the fresh blood is naive and innocent and makes mistakes, anything is better than business as usual, because business as usual is risking the entire planet itself in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper everybody will use for the next 100 years. We're going to take another break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Monday here. We did find and post the story about the Indian Point reactor. It wasn't that the control rod broke off. Apparently the motor that moves it up and down lost power on 2 of the units. And yes, at that point you shut the reactor down and you start looking at what's going on, because if 2 are failing, more are on the edge of failing. Story coming out of NN News, record levels of Fukushima radiation detected off the west coast. Massive plume stretches for more than 1,000 miles. Reuters is reporting contamination is spreading off U.S. shores. But Ann Coulter and the FDA are out there saying that a little radiation is good for you. Now, over in Paris, as you know, they're having their COP21 climate summit, and they have gone to extraordinary lengths to prevent anybody questioning the most holy revealed dogma of human-caused global warming from being anywhere near the site. France used the new emergency laws passed in the wake of the Paris false flag to literally place climate doubters, climate questioners, under house arrest. If they show up at the venue for COP21, they will go to jail. And it just got even worse than that, because apparently there are a lot of people at the COP21 climate summit, people invited, people with credentials, who are saying there is reason to doubt. And global warming activists are saying these skeptics could derail the UN treaty, and they're demanding the United Nations revoke the credentials of anybody not 110% on board the human-caused global warming hoax. Does that sound like a scientific conference? Or does it sound like a fanatical religion? Burn the heretics, or at least burn their credentials. Lock them in their homes. They're literally now down to purging the actual official delegates from the UN talks who are saying we should probably take another look at this. Because despite the promises of the carbon Nazis back in 2000 that snowfalls are a thing of the past, we've had several record-setting winters. And winter has started arriving early, all over the northern hemisphere. Now, we're still a few weeks away from the official start of winter. But obviously, all these prognostications of the carbon Nazis, 1990s up to 2000, have not worked out. And if they can't predict what was happening in just a few years, then they don't have a clue what's going on 100 years from now. And they're going to come back and say, well, weather is weather and climate is climate, and the two are completely separate. No, they're not. Climate is weather averaged over time. You cannot have a warming climate and colder weather. That's one of the big lies. Now, one of the issues that is rearing its ugly head over at COP21 is how all the leaders of all these small third world countries are saying they will not come on board any kind of a UN climate treaty unless the giant industrial nations pay them trillions of dollars for climate damage they've already suffered. And they're talking trillions and trillions of dollars. They want to loot the wealth of the industrialized nations and redistribute it to all these third world nations, where it'll basically go into the pockets of the dictators and not benefit the people. But that's what they're putting on out there. We will not sign the UN climate agreement unless we're paid to. It's all politics and money. Very interesting article over in the Federalist talking about Bill Nye. Now, if you're as old as I am, you remember that Bill Nye was the son of Louis Nye. He was very popular on TV back when I was a kid. And Bill Nye likes to call himself the science guy. And he doesn't really have much of a science background. He's just enthusiastic about it. And he calls himself Bill Nye, the science guy. But the Federalist has renamed him Bill Nye, the propaganda guy, and they really should, because Bill Nye is fully on board the human-caused global warming movement, and even more than that, Bill Nye is out there insisting that human-caused global warming is the reason behind terror attacks. If you had all paid a carbon tax years ago, the Paris attacks wouldn't have happened. Global warming is the reason for more terror attacks, according to Bill Nye. Meanwhile, down in Perth, they just had their coldest December day in 54 years. Little something to think about. Now, 10 African countries have agreed they're going to start replanting lost jungle. It's a little harder than you might think, but they're going to make the effort. They're setting aside 100 million hectares for reforestation. That's twice the size of Europe. to plant more green plants that will eat carbon dioxide out of the air and release oxygen. It is an ideal solution. The carbon Nazis hate it because they want carbon taxes, not an actual fix. It's like the cancer industry. They don't want a cure. They want more treatments. But the World Bank and Germany are agreeing, in part, to fund this operation, to restore all that green jungle. We should be doing the same thing down in Brazil with the rainforest. If we all had gardens on the tops of our roofs with green plants, the carbon dioxide problem would be solved. And the world would still be getting warmer or colder based on solar output. Very alarming story. This is a YouTube video. Over in Michigan, a woman is looking at potential jail time for growing a vegetable garden in her front yard, her property, her home. And the police state is saying you can have flowers and decorative plants and things that look good, but if you grow actual food, you will go to jail. Because in the United States in the 21st century, you will not grow your own food. You will buy your food from the supermarket. You will love your GMO and chemicals. You will be dependent on corporations for food, and you will be dependent on the government for the money to buy the food. That's what keeps you under control. If you grow your own food on your own property, chaos will result. The terrorists will win. You won't do as what you're told to do. And that, of course, is the real issue between banning food gardens, banning natural medicines and herbs, banning guns. They don't want you to be independent. They want you dependent because dependency is slavery. Now, turning to the world of computers, there is a growing realization that there's a problem with payment processors. And apparently there is a bootkit technique on these systems that executes before the operating system even starts to load. This is all very sophisticated stuff. And they're stealing all this payment information, making huge amounts of money on it, and the government's attitude is, no big deal. Remember, this government is desperately broke. Would they be willing to steal from the people? Of course they are. Look at civil forfeiture. So it's really a very tiny step from uniformed thievery in the streets to official cybercrime on the Internet. Yes, it's wrong, but we serve a higher purpose. We serve the bankers. We must keep the bankers happy, or the universe will implode. A lot of people are very concerned about the new Hello Barbie doll. It's a Barbie doll, and it works over Wi-Fi. It connects to the Internet, uses cloud storage and processing to allow the doll to talk to the child, which sounds like a really hip thing, but apparently over at Blue Box Security, they've discovered this thing is incredibly easy to hack into, allowing people of dubious intent, like the National Security Agency, to spy on your child and possibly influence what's being sent back to the doll. Barbie tells your little girl, go get your mother's wallet, put it in an envelope and address it to blah, 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 Washington, D.C. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I've got to do Jim Goddard's show in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, share what you know with everybody you know. Literally, the fate of planet Earth is on the line here. I need your help. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.